For our afternoon session, we begin actually with a presentation by Melissa Buron from her, who is the director of the Arts Division at the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco. Unfortunately, at the last minute, Melissa had to cancel the trip out here, and so she has asked that we read her paper for her, which we're happy to do, and I will be doing that. But I wanted to give you a little background on Melissa, a remarkable Tissot scholar. Melissa E. Buron is director of the Art Division at the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco. For some of you, you may know it as the Legion of Honor Museum in San Francisco. She graduated magna cum laude from Brown University, where she earned a BA with honors in art history. She also holds MA with distinction and a Doctor of Philosophy degrees in art history from the University of London. Her curatorial and research contributions have supported more than 20 special exhibitions on subjects from the 15th to the 19th centuries. She recently organized Truth and Beauty, the Pre-Raphaelites and the Old Masters in 2018, and the landmark exhibition James Tissot, Fashion and Faith, which included a publication on the artist, which exhibited in 2019. I feel very privileged to be presenting Melissa's paper, which is based on her extensive dissertation research on James Tissot and his religious life. So to begin, James Tissot, born 1836, died 1902, is typically remembered for fashionable paintings of elegant women, seen here, and debonair men, which emphasize the material over the spiritual. Yet the late-in-life expression of his enthusiasm for Catholicism consumed the final 2 decades of the artist's career, during which time he produced hundreds of watercolor interpretations of scenes from the Old and New Testaments, often referred to as the Tissot Bible. In his lifetime, these works brought Tissot greater fame and wealth than anything else produced during his career. But today, they are perhaps the least well-known images in his oeuvre. Between 1885 and his death in 1902, Tissot not only experienced a renewed fervor for Orthodox religion, but he was also deeply attracted to the occult philosophies of spiritualism and even attended seances. This paper explores select images from Tissot's The Life of Christ series, their relationship to the sensational visual culture of 19th century spiritualism, the spectacular forums for mass entertainment caused by their international exhibition tour, and their influence on movies with biblical themes. First, this paper will briefly introduce the relationship between spiritualism and Tissot's The Life of Christ. Then it will discuss the watercolor's spectacular presentation and reception. And finally, it will introduce their impact on early cinema. It ultimately aims to present 3 important frameworks for considering all of Tissot's biblical watercolors within the context of the 19th century's visual culture of spectacle. Tissot's renewed belief in Catholicism and fascination with occult practices is documented after the untimely death in 1882 of his companion and primary model, Kathleen Newton, at the age of 28. 3 years later, in 1885, Tissot produced the mediumistic apparition. Tissot's mezzotint after a painting records the alleged materialization of the deceased Kathleen Newton and her spirit guide at a seance. In the same year, Tissot claimed that he witnessed a spiritual vision during Mass in the Parisian church of Saint-Sulpice. Set against the backdrop of the Catholic revival, which popularized the experience of mystical revelations, Tissot's vision, represented inner voices, this painting from 1885, depicts Christ outlined with a glowing bluish tint. This phosphorescent glow extends beyond Christ's head where a halo would typically crown him. The unearthly glow emitted by the figures in the mediumistic apparition is reminiscent of the luminosity that outlines Christ's torso, in Inner Voices. My PhD thesis research focuses on the visual connections between fine art, like Tissot's Inner Voices, and the mediumistic apparition, 1885. Spiritualist imagery, such as a photograph of Tissot's medium, William Eglinton with a materialized spirit, and works from Tissot's biblical series, which also suggest supernatural affiliations, such as Jesus Walks on the Sea, 1886 to 1894. Inner Voices and the mediumistic apparition connect the visual language of spiritualism with select examples from Tissot's later religious watercolors, like Jesus Walks on the Sea, particularly in the radiant appearance of otherworldly figures. Victorian spiritualism and its French counterpart, Spiritism, were not comprised of a singular and homogeneous discourse. While it is beyond the scope of this paper to provide an account of 19th century spiritualism, it is useful to address the fact that the movement was a complex system of beliefs that drew from sources such as scientific attempts to prove life after death and Christian doctrines that described heavenly afterlife. This socio-religious phenomenon espoused confirmation that the soul survives and continues to progress through stages of development after bodily death. Spiritualism took this belief further than Judeo-Christian doctrines of the hereafter by presenting direct communication between the living and dead as proof of this theory. The movement's adherents and skeptics also generated a rich production of visual material, from photographs of ghostly materializations at seances to drawings by mediums who claimed to be under the control of spirit guides. Tissot's own artistic expression of his experience at a seance, the mediumistic apparition, presents viewers with an image of the visual encounter that he claimed to have witnessed. And Inner Voices is a similar product of a purported vision. Tissot would further explore the reinterpretation of ethereal visions depicting otherworldly themes in his biblical illustrations, produced over the following 2 decades. Rather than objects of private and personal devotion, the mediumistic apparition, Inner Voices, and Tissot's biblical illustrations should be considered as part of the 19th century's visual culture of spectacle. A spectacle must be seen, both by the artist and spectator. Just as Tissot claimed to see a materialization of his deceased lover's spirit at a seance, and just as he described seeing a vision of Christ in the Church of Saint-Sulpice, his watercolors were also products of similarly spectacular visions, which he specifically intended for public consumption. Moreover, between Tissot's biblical watercolors and the public reaction to them both Tissot's biblical watercolors and the public reaction to them should be considered as part of the visual culture of spectacle and the period's spectacularization of the Bible as a forum for mass public entertainment. The life of Christ's spectacularization was amplified by Tissot's flamboyant self-promotion and the publicity around his relentless pursuit of authenticity during their research and production. He made 3 trips to the Holy Land, and after his initial 2 trips, the first in 1886 and the second in 1888, Tissot exhibited watercolors from the life of Christ in Paris at the Salon de Champ de Mars of 1894, where they were met with astonishment and positive critical assessments. This exhibition has been labeled as unquestionably the greatest public success of Tissot's career. The watercolors were exhibited in London from 1896 to 97, where they were extremely popular attractions, while on display in the newly renovated and renamed Le Mercier Gallery. This space at 35 Bond Street was previously known as the Doré Gallery, since it was where 20 large-scale canvases of New Testament subjects by Gustave Doré were exhibited from 1868 to 1892. Tissot was certainly aware that this association would strategically situate his works in the perception of London visitors as Doré's successor, and that it would position him advantageously in the lineage of popular Bible illustrators. Tissot's Bible illustrations caused an international sensation when they were exhibited worldwide. The Life of Christ watercolors were incredibly popular as they toured from city to city, and accounts exist of viewers dropping to their knees in prayer in front of Tissot's illustrations. An 1897 article in the spiritualist periodical Borderland, titled "The Gospel in Pictures by a Spiritualist," describes their extraordinary reception. Quote, "When the whole of these pictures were exhibited in Paris, they created an unprecedented sensation of a religious character. People were seen to go away weeping. Women made the tour of the rooms on their knees. It partook, indeed, towards the end, the character of a pilgrimage." Similarly, according to the biographer and journalist Robert Sherrard, quote, "It may be said without exaggeration that rarely has any artistic exhibit created so profound an impression on the public at large as this series of Tissot's illustrations. Some extraordinary scenes revealing the deep impression produced were frequently to be seen. Even the callous and the skeptical were observed to remove their hats as, slowly and with marked attention, they passed from one picture to the other. Women were seen to sink down on their knees as though impelled by a superior force, and literally crawl round the rooms in this position as though in adoration. The dramatic veneration of Tissot's Bible illustrations rendered them objects of a spectacular performance of religious devotion. Their most spectacular presentation and reception occurred as their fame grew and after their 1898 arrival in the United States. The series toured various American cities, including New York, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, and St. Louis. Again, reports describe great crowds moved to their knees in reverence. Tissot earned $100,000 from the U.S. tour admission fees alone. The Brooklyn Museum ultimately acquired the Life of Christ, and the watercolors were displayed in purpose-built galleries until the 1930s. Over 20 different editions of the Life of Christ with chromolithographic reproductions were available to consumers with price points commensurate with the quality and rarity of the edition. While the Tissot Bible, as it was called, was attractive to many buyers, Tissot's obvious commercialization of the Bible angered some contemporaries, like his former friend, Edgar Degas, who equated Tissot's sale of a Degas painting with his commercial religious exploits. Quote, "Now he's got religion. He says he experiences inconceivable joy in his faith. At the same time, he not only sells his own products high, but sells his friends' pictures as well. Well, I can take my vengeance. I shall do a caricature of Tissot with Christ behind him, whipping him, and call it Christ driving his merchant from the temple." End quote. Degas implied that Tissot was motivated solely by financial gain under the pretense of piety, that he was profiteering rather than proselytizing. One of the most spectacular products from the success of the Life of Christ worldwide tour was that Tissot had apparently planned to exhibit his Bible illustrations in their own pavilion at the Universal Exposition of 1900. The architectural designs by the noted French architect Henri Nenoy were presumably rejected, as the pavilion was not one of those built. The tented design may have been intended for the display of Tissot's Life of Christ and Old Testament illustrations combined, over 750 images with additional pen and ink drawings. Although this pavilion may also have displayed other examples of his work, since the design's title suggests that they are a museum for the works of James Tissot. The pavilion's relationship to Tissot's biblical illustrations is implied in the similar setting depicted in one of Tissot's own works, the pagan temple built by Hadrian on the site of Calvary. The interior, with columns and pilasters, recalls descriptions of the Champ de Mars 1894 display. The lower level has what looks like auditorium seating and a stage, which may have been for dioramas or lantern slide presentations. It is possible that plans for the pavilion were canceled when the Life of Christ watercolors were acquired by public subscription at a cost of $60,000 for the Brooklyn Museum in 1900. This feat, which had never been attempted by any other American municipality, was heralded by the president of Brooklyn's Board of Trustees as such an important acquisition that, quote, the popular interest in them will be permanent, and that the galleries which contain them will be the most crowded of the building, end quote. Their value to Brooklyn in context of other forms of spectacular popular entertainment is attested to by the argument posed in a contemporary newspaper report, which said, "It is well to acquire works of this kind, if only to maintain the museum's popularity, just as it is desirable that while it gives orchestral concerts, it should also capture audiences by recitals, songs, magic lantern exhibitions, and elocutionary entertainments." End quote. Accordingly, when they were ultimately displayed in their dedicated galleries in Brooklyn, celebratory announcements advertised that flowers and palms would embellish the galleries and that a boy soprano named Earl Gulick would sing hymns and selections from oratorios relating to the life of Christ. Thus, the spectacular nature of their exhibition in Brooklyn was multisensorial, with scent and sounds enhancing their display. Although largely forgotten in the intervening decades, their presentation in a special exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum in 2009 prompted one New York Times journalist to comment regarding Tissot's Life of Christ, saying the paintings are like stills from a Hollywood movie spectacular. Michael Wentworth, one of the 20th century's preeminent Tissot scholars, even compared Tissot to a casting director. And indeed, the proto-cinematic qualities of Tissot's images, especially the manner in which Tissot's compositions alternate from bird's-eye views to zoomed-in close-ups of individual figures, is one rationale for their frequent quotation in 20th and 21st century films. His images can be credited with inspiring the biblical films of D.W. Griffith and Cecil B. DeMille, scenes in the groundbreaking silent film From the Manger to the Cross, 1912, the crucifixion scene in Ben-Hur, views of the suffering of Jesus from Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, and even the appearance of the Ark of the Covenant in Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark, which all owe a visual debt to Tissot. It is not just the similarity of biblical subject matter that relates Tissot's images to early and modern biblical motion pictures, but it is the artist's unique perspectives and details, as well as the format of how the images in his Bible unfolded that made his work specifically attractive to filmmakers. Michael Wentworth aptly characterized Tissot's watercolors as, quote, the unsung progenitors of generations of Hollywood biblical epics, end quote. From the Manger to the Cross is one of the first American feature-length films, and it is described as the first American film spectacular. It is considered by the National Film Preservation Foundation as the most important silent film to portray the life of Christ, and it is listed on the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress, attesting to its importance in the history of early cinema. This film used Tissot's watercolors as a sourcebook and storyboard, and many shots were based directly on his illustrations, such as the opening scene, The Holy Virgin in Her Youth. The film's 5 reels are also structured in the same sequence sectioning as Tissot's Bible: Holy Childhood, the Ministry, Holy Week, the Passion, and the Resurrection. It has been suggested that biblical films made a bid for legitimacy at a time when the new film medium was not yet fully accepted by social and educated elites. By basing scenes in From the Manger to the Cross on Tissot's Bible images, the spectacle of this early film was grounded in an art historical foundation, which the filmmakers cited as evidence of the film's authenticity. From the Manger to the Cross offered one of the first versions of Tissot's pictures in motion, rendering this film the literal evocation of a moving picture. The actor Joseph Hennebrey, who appeared as Abraham Lincoln in D.W. Griffith's silent film Birth of a Nation, 1915, also assisted Griffith directorially for Intolerance, 1916, and he credited Tissot as a source for the later film. This is his quote, "We followed extremely carefully the garments that Tissot painted in his Life of Christ. I had many books relating to the period, and I couldn't find any equal to his. Something happened in his life, and he became religious, and the great authority on the life of Christ." Similarly, for the 1927 film, The King of Kings, advertised as Cecil B. DeMille's supreme dramatic spectacle, it is Tissot and Gustave Doré who are cited as providing the most striking parallels to the actor H.B. Warner's Christ, and that by this time their illustrations were part of the visual tradition inherited by DeMille and his audiences. Perhaps the best known and the most original composition in Tissot's Life of Christ series is What Our Lord Saw from the Cross, which establishes a viewpoint from the crucified Christ perspective and invites audiences to witness the scene from this elevation. Tissot encourages viewers to imagine themselves as Christ, and by extension, perhaps to imagine Christ's physical and emotional suffering. Tissot also depicts the range of emotions exhibited by spectators, from concern and anguish to vulgar fascination and morbid curiosity. These emotions prompt viewers to recognize the range of human feeling in response to Christ's crucifixion. In William Wyler's 1959 film Ben-Hur, the camera during the crucifixion raises to a bird's eye or God view at the same time as the cross is lifted, so that the ultimate perspective is from above with the panorama of the crowd below. This visual treatment of the dramatic scene echoes the innovative perspective of the crucifixion suggested by Tissot in What Our Lord Saw from the Cross. This paper has introduced several ways in which Tissot's religious watercolors may be considered within the visual culture of spectacle in the 19th and 20th centuries, and the artist's position between the worlds of spirituality and consumerism. Hopefully, this ongoing research about the life and career of James Tissot, such as the papers presented today, will also serve to reframe the way that Tissot's biblical images are considered by contemporary scholars, museum visitors, and future generations of Tissot's enthusiasts. Thank you.